Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Tracy Boggs, Strategic Planning Manager in the Office of Strategy and Transformation at The Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center and co-chair of the Women of Color Employee Resource Group. And I'm honored to serve as your Mistress of Ceremonies for our program today. We have an excellent program planned, and we are so happy to have you all joining us. Today's first Juneteenth celebration is hosted by The Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center Diversity Council in partnership with our employee resource groups. In addition, this program is supported by the following organizations: the Hale Black Cultural Center, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and the Office of Institutional Equity. Thank you all for your support of our program. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items to mention. All attendees, with the exception of the panelists, will be muted and cameras will remain off. This program is being recorded. Live closed captioning will be provided throughout the program. Please click the CC button at the bottom of your screen to turn on this feature. On June 19, 1865, enslaved African Americans in Galveston, Texas, were told they were free. The announcement came 2.5 years after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st, 1863, that freed slaves in Confederate states. The holiday received its name by combining June and 19. The day is also sometimes called Juneteenth Independence Day, Freedom Day, Jubilee Day, or Emancipation Day. And although it has long been celebrated in the African American community, this monumental event remains largely unknown to most Americans. Juneteenth is an opportunity to celebrate African Americans' culture, history, and accomplishments. We will begin our program with a united international drum call from performers of African, Native American, and Asian descent.
We go to the four corners, calling everyone to come. It's time for the celebration. It's Bunga Alapia. Welcome. Bunga Alapia. Ashe, Ashe. Bunga Alapia. Ashe, Ashe. Welcome you to this time and place in this event. And traditionally, we're usually open by calling people from the different corners with the drum call, which we're going to do now. And this drum call is letting everybody know as they come in dancing. They just don't walk in. So we're going to do the drum call now. And I'm going to have my wife start.
Thank you to our wonderful performers, Elder Tony West, Aziza West, Mansfield Moore, Larry Redis, Vinayak Parvate, and Mansi Chajar. Next, please welcome to the program, Dr. Hal Paz, Executive Vice President and Chancellor for Health Affairs and CEO of The Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center.
Well, thank you so very much, Tracy, and good afternoon, Buckeye family. Wow, what an exciting way to kick off this celebration. Thank you to the outstanding drummers and artists who put together this inspiring set of performances. This really, truly reminds us that we are one family. I am so truly honored to have been invited to participate in such a historic and hopeful occasion. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual Juneteenth celebration on this Thursday afternoon and to be part of this inaugural celebration. As Tracy mentioned, the Juneteenth holiday commemorates the date in 1865 when enslaved African Americans in Galveston, Texas, were read federal orders freeing them under the terms of the 1863 Emancipation Proclamation. On this day, we come together to celebrate African American history, culture, and accomplishments. For more than 150 years, Juneteenth celebrations have reflected the resilience and determination of Black Americans. It is a time for rejoicing, but also it is an important opportunity for reflection, for acknowledging how this period in American history has shaped our society today, so together we can create a more equitable present and future. Here at Ohio State, our Buckeye spirit serves as the foundation for creating a positive, respectful, and open culture. We are committed to demonstrating inclusiveness in how we interact with each other every single day, whether we are engaging with our colleagues, our patients, or the communities we serve. I am so very proud of the work we've done to ensure that we continue to address and eliminate systemic racism. But we know that progress requires continuous self-reflection to identify gaps, recognize areas in need of improvement, and building upon existing policies and structures that are leading us in the right direction. I want to thank the Chief Diversity Officer of our institution, Dr. Leon McDougall, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and members of the Diversity Council for their continued leadership in these efforts, especially for their work in organizing this afternoon's outstanding event. The Council, along with the faculty and staff champions who serve on the 8 employee resource groups, have helped us foster an environment of sharing diverse insights, addressing critical issues, and closing diversity and inequity gaps. We know that there's a lot more that needs to be done, but I am enormously inspired that this is a priority across the Wexner Medical Center and the health science colleges, and I am so inspired to witness the passion and commitment with which we are approaching this work. And with that, I am pleased to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries. Dr. Jeffries is an associate professor of history at The Ohio State University, where he's been teaching courses on civil rights and African American history for the last 18 years. He's author of Bloody Lounds, Civil Rights and Black Power in Alabama's Black Belt, and the editor of Understanding and Teaching the Civil Rights Movement, which won the 2020 James Harvey Robinson Prize from the American Historical Association. He also wrote and narrated the 10-episode Audible original series, Great Figures of the Civil Rights Movement, which was released last year, and hosts the Teaching Hard History podcast, a production for the Learning for Justice Division of the Southern Poverty Law Center, which just finished its 3rd season. In the classroom, he's won a number of major teaching awards, including the Ohio State University Alumni Award for Distinguished Teaching, and which is the university's highest teaching award. In addition, Dr. Jeffries has worked on several public history projects, including serving as the lead historian for the 5-year, $25 million renovation of the National Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. Thank you all so very much for joining us this afternoon. And now please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeffries.
Dr. Paz, thank you very much for the warm words of introduction, and most especially for the encouraging words that you offer all of us who are affiliated and associated with the Ohio State University regarding the Wexner Medical Center's commitment to diversity, to equity, and to inclusion, and to narrowing and eliminating those gaps that continue to persist because of the legacy of slavery and the ongoing problems born of systemic racism. I'm very grateful to the members of the Diversity Council and all those who have been responsible for putting together this truly historic, important, and significant event to commemorate Juneteenth. And I have been charged with the task as a historian right across the street in Dulles Hall here, as part of the OSU community, of sharing some history, some context, putting Juneteenth, the historic event, but then also The reason for the celebration, the reason why this is emerging as such a critical moment of reflection into this sort of broader context. Now, I'm going to see if I can't manage to control this screen and see where we go. There we go. So as has already been stated, and I just want to lay a little extra emphasis on it, Juneteenth represents a day, represents a moment. June 19th, 1865 in Galveston, Texas, when Union General Gordon Granger landed with federal troops, Union troops, and declared that slavery was officially over, that those who had been held in bondage were now free. 250 years of slavery was done. The day of Jubilee had arrived. Now, this occurs 2 months after the cessation of hostilities in the Civil War. General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse in April, and yet Texas, enslaved African Americans in Texas would not be freed at that moment. One, because Texas was the western frontier of the Confederacy, and so it took a little while for word to reach. There's no internet in 1865, but more than just the time it took to travel that distance was the need for the presence of Union forces, the need for the presence of military forces, because enslavers were not going to just yield to a message. They were going to yield to a force. They had just fought the bloodiest conflict in U.S. history for 5 years to maintain the institution of slavery, to maintain their control over Black bodies and Black labor. And so they weren't going to surrender or yield easily. So you needed that federal presence. You needed you needed those men in blue to show up, to reinforce the order, to reinforce this new development. It's also important to understand that in 1863, Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. And this, of course, is, sometimes we look back and we think of that and we say, oh, this is the moment that we ought to mark. And why don't we mark that moment as the moment of true emancipation? Because no one is actually emancipated on January 1, 1863. The Emancipation Proclamation is a military measure. Lincoln issues a preliminary one in September of 1862, 100 days before New Year's Eve. And he gives Confederates, he gives those who are in insurrection and in rebellion, who have been fighting for 2 years already, he gives them an out. He gives them an option. He says, if you lay down your arms, and this is in the Emancipation Proclamation, if you lay down your arms, if you cease your rebellion, you can come back into the Union and you can keep your enslaved folk. You can keep them if you stop fighting this war, if you come back into the Union. But if you continue your rebellious activities, if you continue this attempt to break away from the United States, then those enslaved folk in your territories are now free. And of course, Lincoln did not have the military power, the military presence to free those enslaved Africans who were in states of that were being controlled by the Confederacy. And those states that were in the upper North, in the upper South, that were in fact under Union control already, those states where Lincoln could have actually freed enslaved folk, he does not. Those states that were not in rebellion were allowed to continue to control, to keep African Americans underfoot. So the Emancipation Proclamation is important. It marks this moment where the war is now about slavery. The great irony of the Civil War is that the South was fighting a war to preserve the institution of slavery, and the North in the beginning was fighting a war not to end slavery. They were fighting a war to say the South, you can stay in, we're just going to limit further expansion. But once you get that Emancipation Proclamation, that military measure, I say because it allows African-American men, African-American soldiers to finally enlist in the U.S. Army, to enlist in the Navy. They had been wanting to fight this war from the moment the first shots are fired at Fort Sumter in South Carolina, and they were turned away. Frederick Douglass is pleading with Abraham Lincoln, pleading with the governor of Massachusetts to let Black people fight. They have been fighting all along, and they want to fight it in this war. And so the Emancipation Proclamation opens the door for that needed, much needed troops, additional troops to join this war effort. And eventually, nearly 200,000 African Americans would fight on the side of the Union Army. So the Emancipation Proclamation opens the doors. It's an important turning point moment, but it's not the moment when enslaved African Americans finally are able to fully enjoy their freedom. And then after Juneteenth, that last day, when the word finally reaches those in Texas, the last of the enslaved African Americans who are able to finally cross into freedom, permanent freedom, we see the 13th Amendment, which would be ratified later that year. Important and critical, but again, that doesn't end slavery. Slavery had been ended. That just says that the institution of slavery, forced bondage, is forevermore unconstitutional, with the important caveat, except as punishment for a crime, which then has its own implications later on. So Juneteenth is really an important moment and an important marker because it does really symbolize and note the moment when slavery truly comes to an end in the United States. It is important to acknowledge, one of the things that is important about this day, celebrating Juneteenth, and why it really is remarkable how far we have come. There have been folk who have been agitating and organizing around getting Juneteenth recognized as a holiday at all levels: local, county, city, state, and now the federal level, because we have no day in which we as a nation come together and pause and reflect on this moment of democracy being realized, the expansion of democracy. We still have, of course, July 4th, and marking this moment of American independence from Britain. But that is not, it's a promise unfulfilled, because the institution of slavery during the Revolutionary era is not abolished. In fact, there are new safeguards that come out of the American Revolution era to protect the institution of slavery, to allow its expansion, to put limits on those African Americans who were enslaved and desperately sought their freedom, embedding into the Constitution the Fugitive Slave Act, empowering folk outside of slave-holding states. And remember, every colony every British colony maintained the institution of slavery, had enslaved folk. And so the promise of the American Revolution is unfulfilled. It's a lost opportunity. And Black folk understood that. Black folk understood that from 1776 up until 1865. Frederick Douglass, again, that one of the great Americans, not just African Americans, one of the great Americans of this era, gives a powerful speech in which he says, what to the Negro, what to the slave is the 4th of July. We can celebrate the independence of the nation, but what good is that for us if we don't have independence of our own bodies, of our own minds, because we are still shackled in slavery? And then after emancipation occurs, we still see the persistence of racial inequality, the persistence of Jim Crow. And so here again, it's like, what are we celebrating if all men / women are still not treated equally? So it's important that that Juneteenth provides us this opportunity to look more fully at the experiences of America with freedom, and this transition and definition of what freedom actually is. So Juneteenth ought to be a learning day. It's really remarkable now that both the Senate and the House have passed a bill that will make Juneteenth a national holiday. And that's important. It's a day for folk to come together, and I'll say a little bit more about the celebration component of it in a second. But it's also a day that should be about learning, just as MLK's birthday ought to be about service, a day of service, not necessarily a day of sales. Juneteenth, I hope, and it's been the hope of many, becomes a day of learning. And learning about what? Learning about our past, and more specifically, learning about what slavery actually was, what it entailed, and hopefully learning about the experiences of the enslaved themselves. And that people would walk away from this learning experience knowing that the enslaved themselves fought for their own freedom. They were not passive observers in the struggle to end slavery. They were active participants, resisting white supremacy, resisting slavery from 1619 through the present. There is never a moment in time where African Americans, whether they were enslaved or they were free, were not fighting for basic civil rights and human rights. And up until 1865, that meant fighting to abolish and end the institution of slavery. So we have to take the enslaved themselves seriously as political thinkers, as people who understood the situation and circumstance that they were in. Nobody had a better understanding of what freedom meant in America and what freedom meant just theoretically than those folk, enslaved folk, who were denied these basic civil rights and human rights, and yet were living in the presence of those who were enjoying those same rights. And so this moment of reflection where we pause and we look back, hopefully that will allow people to better appreciate the struggle of enslaved African Americans. They weren't just non-thinking folk. They weren't just slaves that conditioned. They were human beings who, despite this evil institution, this crime against humanity, still managed not only to survive, but to thrive, to create and develop and extend culture and make these tremendous contributions to the broader American society. And it's also critically important when we think about Juneteenth that we actually talk about the Civil War, what brought about the end of the institution of slavery. White Southerners didn't suddenly wake up one day and say, hey, I guess this is wrong, we should probably stop it. No, there was a war, a 5-year bloody war, and African Americans, as I was mentioning earlier, participate, take up arms in this war, and they're fighting for freedom. And that is not something that they themselves woke up and said, hey, I guess we should join the war. They have been fighting for freedom, free Blacks as well, from the American Revolution on forward, right? While even during the Revolutionary era, African Americans who wind up fighting in that war, they're not fighting for a cause per se. They're fighting for freedom, whichever side, British or English, British or the American colonists, who's willing to offer Black folk freedom is the side that Black folk were willing to fight for. And that becomes part of this tradition, the Black military tradition. It's like we're fighting not only for a nation, we're fighting not only for a cause, but we're always fighting for freedom. And so Juneteenth, I think, is really this important moment where we can look back and talk about this sort of Black military service. Because one of the things that happens with Juneteenth celebrations for 40 years after the Civil War is that those African Americans who fought in the war are celebrated. There are parades in which these veterans, the greatest generation of that century, Black veterans, are celebrated for their sacrifices in the effort to bring about the end of slavery. Juneteenth is also critically important as this moment because it marks the transition from slavery to freedom. And at that moment of emancipation, when that word is finally reaches the ears of the enslaved, whose family members who had been in bondage for generations. This isn't just something that you woke up with one generation, or a father and a mother and a child. We're talking about 250 years. The institution of slavery exists in North America under British control, under American control. 250 years. So we have our nation. When we look at the length of this the British experience, the American experience from 1619 up until the present, 401 years, we've spent more time with slavery with the institution of slavery than we have with freedom as a whole. And that's critically important. But Black folk understood this, enslaved folk understood this. And so they emerge out of emancipation, not looking around saying, hey, what do we do now? They knew what to do because they reflected on those basic civil rights and human rights that they had been denied while in bondage. And they say these rights These rights that others enjoyed that they were denying us are the rights that we need to pursue. These rights, these basic civil rights and human rights, are the crux of freedom. And this actually begins what we would call too narrowly the civil rights agenda that African Americans would pursue, but it's both civil rights and human rights. And so Frederick Douglass, again, speaking just after the cessation of hostilities, says emancipation is meaningless unless Black folk, Black men at the time have the vote. So there's this political component. There's this pursuit of education. One of the great horrors, one of the great tragedies of slavery is that by law, African Americans, whether you were enslaved or free, you were denied the right, made illegal for you to learn to read or write, to be taught to read or write. So education, we see this feverish effort on the part of African Americans to pursue education. And it's incredible the strides and the gains that they are able to achieve, moving from a population where the illiteracy rate was close to 95% within just a generation or two, 20 or 30 years, cutting that by more than half. I mean, we haven't seen that, a population move from sort of illiteracy to literacy at that rate in human history. So when we look at Juneteenth, it's not just about sort of looking at the moment, looking at what came before June 19th, 1865, but also what comes after. What did Black folk do after? How did they give meaning to freedom and give meaning and define freedom in the terms that they understood would make it most meaningful and most impactful? Juneteenth really has three components. Juneteenth is and should be a day of remembrance. And this is what it was. African Americans formerly enslaved beginning in Texas and elsewhere celebrate emancipation at different times. It really is very regional. So in Texas, they're celebrating it on June 19th, emancipation. Up here in Ohio, many folk are celebrating emancipation or the end of slavery on January 1, the day the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect. In the early 1900s down in Florida, they're celebrating emancipation, not on New Year's Eve, not on New Year's Day, not on June 19th, but they're celebrating it in Florida, tying it to in February, tying it to Lincoln's birthday. So we see these different regional time periods of folk when they're going to celebrate it, but there's commonality in all of these celebrations. That day of remembrance and looking back. What was slavery all about? What did Black folk have to endure, and how did they do it? We knew for a fact that one of the great horrors of the institution of slavery was the forced separation of families. Black men and women, children, families, spouses, siblings are being sold away from each other, never to be seen again. And folk reflected on that because they had spent literally the next 30 or 40 years trying to reconnect with family members, looking for family members, putting advertisements in newspapers, talking about children who were sold away from Virginia to Louisiana and hoping to reconnect with them. So it's a day of remembrance, looking back and say, well, what was this institution and how did Black folk survive? How did they fight back? How did they resist? And then how did they thrive coming out of slavery into emancipation? It is also a day of commemoration. So remembrance, the solemnity of the occasion and understanding what this institution was for 250 years, but also a day of commemoration, commemorating those who brought about the end of slavery. There was nothing guaranteed. There was nothing inevitable about slavery ending. It wasn't about to expire. It could very much continue to expand. It had an urban component. So industrialization wasn't necessarily going to end it. It took people sacrificing their lives, willing to fight, willing to die to end it. And so Juneteenth historically becomes this moment of commemoration, celebrating those Black men who put on the Union blue in order to fight for it. But here in this image, celebrating those other folk. This is an image of Harriet Tubman, who's standing in the far left of that photograph with friends and family, and she's in New York at the time. But Harriet Tubman, of course, was the great conductor of the Underground Railroad, stealing away Black folk, helping them secure their own freedom. But part of the story that's often not told is that she signs up as a spy and works as a spy for the Union Army, heading down into South Carolina, leading sorties into the hinterland out of from a base of operations in in Hilton Head Island. I mean, so she herself and so many others who did not formally or officially wear the Union blue participated in this effort to bring about the abolition of slavery, commemorating those who long before the Civil War sacrificed their life in order to trying to bring about an end to slavery. Nat Turner leading a rebellion in Virginia in 1931, Gabriel Prosser leading a rebellion outside of Richmond in 1800, Denmark Vesey in Charleston, South Carolina. And so paying tribute to those who gave the ultimate sacrifice to bring freedom to Black folk and to give meaning to democracy in America. And then lastly, the third component is this day of celebration. This is important, right? Because if we're going to have a national holiday, if we're going to have a holiday and at all, when we look back at how Juneteenth has historically been celebrated or marked, it is that remembrance and reflection, learning, continuing the stories of the past, understanding that history, a day of commemorating those who sacrificed to fulfill the unfulfilled promise of the Revolutionary era. But then they do it in a way that brings joy and smiles to people's faces. And so we see Juneteenth being a day of celebration with picnics and parades and barbecues. And that's an important part of the Black tradition. Often folk think there's so much stress, there's so much struggle in order to just survive in this nation that sometimes you just gotta sit down and relax, right? And this is one of those moments where Black folk came together. July 4th was just a few weeks away, even when being celebrated when Juneteenth is in its infancy. And that always had this sort of mixed feeling in the minds of Black folk. It was like, yeah, we could celebrate this, but we weren't free. That didn't grant us our independence. But Juneteenth becomes this moment where we can actually and truly celebrate. Now, there are a lot of folk who were saying, and I was asked this question the other day, well, what can, if this is about Black folk and Black folk gaining their freedom, then what's the space, what's the role, what's the place for white folk in celebrating Juneteenth? Well, one, this isn't just about ending slavery for Black folk. This is about ending slavery in America. So this is very much an American tradition. But look, this is the one barbecue, that one cookout that white folk are invited to. Come on, right? Come on, get your barbecue on. But this come and learn and walk away and learn something, having learned something, not just about the Black experience, but very much about the American experience. Because Juneteenth, this moment of emancipation, this critical transition from slavery to freedom, marks a moment not where suddenly full equality exists, but rather a moment where Black folk continue to have to struggle to bring about the full equality. And so we see that coming out of emancipation, African Americans working hard to build community, to strengthen community. And we see that in places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, where they build up the Black Wall Street, a thriving banking and business community. But it's also a time and an era where Black folk are moving into the 20th century, that Black folk are still having to face racial violence and racial terror. And so just as you have a Tulsa, Oklahoma, a Black Wall Street, you have by 1921 that Wall Street being burned down, that Wall Street being, that Black community being destroyed. And so when we think of the Juneteenth in this moment, what can we learn? We have to be clear that the struggle for freedom, the struggle for full civil and human rights does not end when the Civil War ends, because the underlying premise, the justification, the ideological justification for the institution of slavery, for exploiting Black labor, does not disappear. And that is white supremacy. A deep belief in white supremacy and the entitlement of white folk to control Black labor continues after 1865. And so that allows and justifies this use of racial terror to control Black labor and to regulate Black behavior, leading to things like Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the burning, the Tulsa massacre. But it's also important to understand that Black folk are constantly organizing. Just as they fought for their freedom, they're also fighting to secure their basic civil rights and human rights. In 1917, 10,000 Black folk marching silently in the streets of New York City to protest lynching, the use of racial terror to maintain white privilege, to maintain white exploitation of Black folk. And so when we think about this moment, when we get together, when we're at the cookout, when we are celebrating, we got to take some time to make sense, not just of that moment, but of this moment, to draw the connections between Juneteenth, Black folk fighting and securing their emancipation, to the ongoing struggle to secure basic civil rights and human rights for African Americans and for all folk today. There's a direct line that we can draw from June 19th, 1865 to June 19th, 2021. From civil rights to Black power to Black Lives Matter. Folk are not only fighting today for justice for the victims of police violence, but they're also organizing and taking to the streets to secure those basic civil rights and human rights that those freed African Americans, those who were born in slavery and then experienced that transition to freedom, were fighting for as well. So this struggle continues, but it's also not just a struggle just for Black folk. It is a struggle to bring democracy, the core tenets, to fulfill that unfulfilled promise of the American Revolution, to make this a more perfect union. And so when we think about this occasion, when we think about this day, when we think about what it is that people are fighting for and sacrificing for, that people are willing to take to the streets in numbers that we have not seen ever in American history, it is important to understand that this is a struggle that benefits everyone. Just as diversity, equity, and inclusion just does not benefit those who were marginalized before, this is something that benefits everybody. Everybody benefits when we expand democracy. Everybody benefits when we extend civil rights and human rights to everyone. Everybody benefits when we provide equal access to opportunity and ensure equal outcomes with folk, no matter their race, no matter their ethnicity. So I say on this, as a final word, happy Juneteenth. I'm so glad that we were able to spend this time together. And just remember that this is a day of learning, a time to learn and reflect, not to hide from the past, not to get caught up in nostalgia, but to truly connect with history. Because if we understand the past, we can make sense of the present, and then we can build that better, more democratic, more equitable future going forward. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jeffries. Wow, what an amazing lesson for all of us today. And we look forward to your lecture series for the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center's Diversity Council this fall, titled Why We Must Confront the Hard History of Race and Racism in America. Our next speaker is Dr. Leon McDougall, Chief Diversity Officer for the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion, Director, MedPath Pre-Medical Post-Baccalaureate Program, Professor of Family Medicine, and President of the National Medical Association.
Thank you, Chancellor Paz and Professor Jeffries for being with us today. In fact, Professor Jeffries, you are part of our anti-racism campaign. So the knowledge that you shared with us today is advancing our goals, our strategic goals in regards to improving people's lives in Ohio and globally. And so for nearly 156 years after the historic date, the heightened awareness for Juneteenth has never been more vital. Millions of people have been aware of the atrocities that happened to the enslaved. Progress has been made as we look forward to doing more to achieve social justice. Currently, 47 states, including Ohio, recognize Juneteenth as an official state observance. The Diversity Council is honored to host the first celebration at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center. By attending today's program, my hope is that we all walk away with a greater understanding of the importance of American history and the Juneteenth celebration. My first Juneteenth, I was actually in the military and celebrating on the beach in Oceanside, California. So as Chief Diversity Officer for the Wexner Medical Center, I'm incredibly proud of the Diversity Council's work and its 5 committees: climate, communication, health disparities, cultural competency, and the employee resource groups. I am also proud of our 8 employee resource groups. Yes, that's right, 8. We're growing exponentially, that came together to collectively collaborate and support today's event. In addition to honoring and recognizing Juneteenth, the month of June provides 2 important opportunities to elevate conversations surrounding race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability. 1, getting familiar with intersectionality, or the intricate ways multiple identities intersect, helps us to better understand our diverse and multifaceted employees, our workforce, our colleagues, our friends, the people we go to work and to serve our communities. And 2, and help us to deepen our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. We want to also acknowledge that the month of June also celebrates lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and I'll add a plus sign, Pride Month, in honor of the 1969 Stonewall Uprising in Manhattan. The Diversity Council's ERGs are proud to be a part of the celebration and the Pride lighting. So come to our campus and when it's turning dark outside, and please enjoy the lighting of Myling Hall, University Hospital Plaza, the James, and East Hospital. Being equitable and inclusive, and creating structures with equity and inclusion in mind are expectations that are embedded into our organization's values. Yes, we are aligned, The Ohio State University, from the Board of Trustees to the President to the Provost to Dr. James Moore to our deans to Dr. Hassan Jeffries to our Chancellor, our workforce, our colleagues, our learners. We are aligned. And an important step forward, and I would say one of the most innovative outcomes to the cumulative years of work, initiatives and leaders involved in our DEI space, and most recently, the Anti-Racism Action Plan, not only for the medical center, but for the College of Medicine. Dean Bradford made that possible, and Chancellor Haas and others for the medical center. It's the appointment of 27 DEI vice chairs. We are among a few academic health centers with this level and breadth and depth of commitment spanning the entire enterprise. This paired with our growing alignment with our 7 health sciences colleges and the School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences, Dr. Deb Larson, I got that in there, will further strengthen our purpose. With that, I am thrilled to introduce and officially welcome the vice chairs to the Diversity Council. And I'll be meeting with them also from a College of Medicine perspective. So we are also extending an invitation to a DEI leader in each of our health sciences colleges. Together, we will continue to prioritize efforts to promote diversity and equity across the Ohio State Wexner Medical Center and health sciences colleges, and provide a welcoming and thriving environment for our diverse faculty, staff, learners, and community. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge and appreciate the current Diversity Council members. Yes, they are doing a lot of work behind the scenes. I'm so appreciative of them. Millie Valverde, Wanda Dillard. Let me stop there. I don't want to forget anyone. We have a committed group of leaders working with and leading the Diversity Council. So thank you for joining us today. I would say this is part of our anti-racism campaign, and continue to grow in knowledge, and that helps us to better serve our community. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McDougall. To close out our program, I am excited to share a historical monologue and singing of the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Please welcome Dr. Elaine Richardson, Dr. E, Professor of Literacy Studies, Department of Teaching and Learning at The Ohio State University College of Education and Human Ecology. Some of Dr. E's awards include the Edward Fry Book Award, National Reading Conference for African American Literacies 2005, and Fulbright Scholar Award Lecturing and Research. As an artist and advocate, Dr. E, the inspirational soul queen, has a voice that resonates before she even sings a note from her album, Songs for the Struggle. That voice is her story, the improbable but true life of a sex-trafficked teenager who recovered, earned a doctorate, and became a university professor.
Often referred to as the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing was a hymn written as a poem by NAACP leader James Weldon Johnson in 1900. His brother, John Rosamond Johnson, composed the music for the lyrics. A choir of 500 school children at the segregated Stanton School, where James Weldon Johnson was principal, first performed the song in public in Jacksonville, Florida, to celebrate President Abraham Lincoln's birthday. At the turn of the 20th century, Johnson's lyrics eloquently captured the solemn yet hopeful appeal for the liberty of Black Americans. Set against the religious invocation of God and the promise of freedom, the song was later adopted by the NAACP and prominently used as a rallying cry during the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won.
On behalf of the Planning Committee, we extend a special thank you to Drs. Paz and McDougall for their leadership in the area of diversity and inclusion, and their continued support of the diverse faculty, staff, and learners at Ohio State. And a big thank you to our performers, Elder Tony West, Aziza West, Mansfield Moore, Larry Redis, Vinayak Parvate, and Mansi Chajar, and Dr. Elaine Richardson, as well as to our keynote speaker, Dr. Hassan Jeffries. A special thank you to the Planning Committee, the employee resource groups, the university and community partners who visualized this program's importance after a year of protests, a pandemic, and global fatigue. And finally, thank you for taking time out of your afternoon to attend our program. We look forward to seeing you again at our next event. Be safe, stay well, and have a great afternoon.